So first things first, can you just tell us who you are, what you do, and where you work?
My name is Bob Killen. I am sort of known as Mr. Bobby Tables across all the things. I currently work for the CNCF as a senior technical program manager. Before joining a year ago, I was previously at Google in their OSPO, and I've been involved in open source and sort of the Kubernetes cloud native space for quite a while.
And what was it about Kubernetes that first drew you in? How did that start?
So originally, this is going to be a little bit of a story, but Jeff, Sika, Jiffy, and I were at working for the University of Michigan Hospital, and we were developing our own container platform at the time to run clinical workloads, but that didn't work so well. We moved over to Docker, and then that worked, better, but we were looking for some more like automation and things and the like. And so that was like circa 2014. And then we saw this thing called Kubernetes pop up on the scene, and we jumped on that real early, much earlier than we, honestly should have. But it still got us engaged in the project, very early on, back when chat was in IRC and it was in the Google containers, chat room. But for our purposes, we kind of left Kubernetes for a bit and went over to Mesos because that was, more stable at the time. But we re-engaged in 2016, 2017 very heavily, and both of us became much more active then.
And, this is an ecosystem that moves very, very quickly. You've worn many hats. How do you personally stay up to date with all the different changes that are going on?
That is definitely a difficult task. Specifically for Kubernetes, the best way for me to do it is to find the enhancements tracking spreadsheet. Each release of Kubernetes gets a new GitHub project board that outlines, what features are in development, what state they're in, and things of that nature. So you can get a quick idea of what's being built and sort of its current state in the world of things from that. And then just, paying attention to the KDev mailing list, which is the general Kubernetes mailing list.
And in terms of people that have helped you level up in your journey, is there anyone that you'd like to, mention or give a shout out to?
Two people specifically would be Paris Pittman, who was kind of my mentor in Contribex, and she eventually stepped down and I took her seat. And George Castro, who was the one that really dragged myself and Jeef into actually contributing to the project. Circa 2017 at the Kubernetes or at KubeCon, I had met George previously at our meetup, and I had gone down there early, and I texted him hey, where you at? And he gave me the directions, and I went there, and it was the Maintainer Summit, or the Kubernetes Contributor Summit. And he was I was I shouldn't be here. I'm not a real contributor. He handed me a T-shirt and then told me to go sit in the room. and that is how I pretty much became a contributor.
Okay, well, that in mind, my start with being a contributor was through contributor experience and, attending a meeting. Not the same thing as having George throw a T-shirt on you and say, hey, go there and sit down. But I think there's something to be said for that about, participating, listening is contributing, giving other people space is contributing. But after that, with the T-shirt on, what were the first contributions that you started making?
The first thing, legitimately the first real thing that I did, I'd opened up a couple PRs and things like that. But it was really at that contributor summit where I met, I met Paris in person for the first time. I met SpiffXP, Aaron Krickenbacher, Ben the Elder, Thakin, and a whole bunch of people. And we just kind of got started talking. From there, I got a bit more involved in Contribex because George was also heavily involved there at the time. And it was something that I could do, pretty easily without having to, at that time, I was still contributing as a hobby contributor. And it was something I could engage with pretty easily without having to sink a whole lot of time into it.
And Bob, Kubernetes means different things to different people. For you, what is Kubernetes?
Where I made all my friends in my 30s. Really though, Kubernetes itself is a is like a substrate or, you know, the underlying thing that holds up like the new web and infrastructure and everything like that these days. It's crazy just how far it's gone, that you find it, you know, it's running in planes, it's running in cars, on edge devices. It is like, when it comes to how ubiquitous it is out there, there's the Linux kernel and Linux, and then there's Kubernetes. And that's kind of like crazy to think about, and just sort of like where it is in the space.
And so, like you said, from a technical perspective, you know, how ubiquitous it's become. But then you also mentioned, you know, where you made all your friends in your 30s. I want to focus now on the, you know, the people side. Can you give us a bird's eye view of Kubernetes as an open source project with all the contributors that it has from all over the world?
It is a great mixing pot. These days, I'll flat say it's a little bit harder to get involved just because it's a much more mature project. But you will find just a whole slew of passionate people that want to help, want to make sure it succeeds, want to make sure it doesn't break anyone that's using it, you know, in those planes and cars and wherever it's running. So I guess, like, for me, it's just like people that really care about the space and things like that.
And how does a contribution actually travel from a KEP to something real that engineers run in production?
Before the KEP, for a KEP is a Kubernetes enhancement proposal, which tends to be a, you know, large scale feature type thing that's going to be pushed into Kubernetes. These days, KEPs take significant work to get through, outside of just like writing the KEP itself. So it's lots of, you know, meeting with the people that are, you know, tech leads or experts in that specific area of the code base, getting their buy-in, because they'll have to review the KEP and review whatever, you know, PRs you're opening, and sort of going from there. These days it is difficult to get something like that in. It's why a lot of feature development is now happening like out of tree in things like Kubernetes SIGs. Like, that's where, you know, the Gateway API was developed. That's where Q was developed. So there's a lot more, I'd say, like rapid development outside of core, and that's sort of like where it's easier to sort of do some of these feature development type things.
And to go back to, you know, the people that are involved in this project, why do contributors show up? What motivates them? What do they get out of this? What's in it for them?
So, like, I'll say, like, for everyone, it's different. Some people, it is, you know, just part of their job. And for others, it is, like, I'll say, like, especially for students and things like that, they hear how easy it is to contribute to the project, and it can look very good on like a resume or things like that, and sort of just building your credibility. For others, it's just kind of a super interesting, you know, project. Like that, for me personally, that's why I kind of like still continue to keep like tabs on the project, even though back in the day we had to switch to like, you know, Mesos, just because it was very interesting. I like the patterns that were being developed. So I'd say it's, you know, I know it's kind of like a cop-out answer, but like everyone kind of has their own reasons for getting involved. I will say the project itself tends to be very sticky, and like the people that do sort of stay in the project and find their like space stay around.
Yeah, I was talking to Phil Estes about that. The same thing, you know, people that have now been involved in this project for a decade, and other people don't necessarily last all that time, but for those that are there, it's obviously for different reasons. And you mentioned a little bit about, you know, the backgrounds of some of the contributors. We have people that are, you know, students, professionals, vendors, end users, people that are paid versus volunteers. What's the mix like? Who are these contributors?
So these days, I would say it's vastly, you know, professionals and people that, you know, work on it either as part of their day job or as something that's like adjacent to their day job. Like, I know a couple people that work on some of the cluster API providers that, you know, technically it's not part of their job to work on those things, but they use it. And when they encounter bugs, they have the know-how to, like, you know, contribute back. We do have, you know, students and, you know, other folk who get involved to help with docs, program managers who get involved and help with like triage, and, you know, some of the more, like, I'll say, non-technical organizational skills and things. Like most of the chair roles in the Kubernetes project tend to lean more towards like the organization and people management side. But yeah, I think it kind of goes back to like it's a whole variety of things.
And what are the main ways that people can level up in this ecosystem?
The biggest thing is be engaged and ask the right questions. The right questions is I guess the wrong word, but we have a lot of people that will say like, hey, please help teach me to contribute, or hey, please teach me this. But they've done like no real due diligence or research themselves. But if you come to the table and you've looked at, the code base, you've looked at, a potential KEP or things like that, and are like, hey, I'm interested in contributing this feature, this issue. I've looked at the code. I've read some of the history behind it. I have a couple specific questions. That shows you are engaged and can actually, are comfortable doing some of the work yourself. And people will be much more willing to help guide you, shepherd you, mentor you, as long as you are willing to actually like do that investment. Maintainers these days are very, strapped for time, and, they can't be there to, handhold you as much as they might want to. So people that are like self-starters can sort of learn with just a little bit of guidance, will go far.
I would heavily agree. And yeah, when you see that someone's made the effort, that they're comfortable being uncomfortable in environments where maybe they don't know everything, but they're taking the time to read the docs, to attend meetings. You've got tons of talks from KubeCon, previous KubeCons that you can watch. There's lots of resources out there. So if you're really motivated and take the time to do it, like you said, I think it makes those conversations much more fruitful, and the questions will be much more targeted rather than, can't help me contribute. And like, yeah, show me that you've done the homework first. I really like that. Good.
I literally get like, 50 plus DMs a week of like, hey, I'm new, teach me. And to be honest, I just ignore them unless the person has actually shown a bit more initiative, especially in their messaging. Like, just don't have time to go through all that.
Yeah. There are ample resources. If you just, type how to get started in the CNCF contributor guides, there are lots and lots of things out there.
Oh yeah.
I definitely agree with that. Now, this is a very, large, we're talking about, large amount of people that are involved, all these projects, all the infrastructure that's necessary to keep this going. Who organizes and funds all this? And what's the balance between vendors and end users?
It largely comes, I'll say, like from the vendors in terms of both funding and like people time. The larger vendors have also donated resources, such, Google, AWS, Azure have donated like cloud credits so that Kubernetes can do its testing. For those that might not be super familiar, like Kubernetes testing, like every release they'll spin up like 5,000 nodes, and that can get expensive, very quick. So we are testing overall is in the, millions of dollars a year. And that we wouldn't be able to, do it all without the vendor support. The CNCF itself provides like some, like there's the technical oversight committee and things like that provide some sort of like top level governance and recommendations, but the projects themselves are mostly allowed to self-govern. The big thing that the CNCF can do is like when you need to escalate concerns to a greater group, they can help with that. They're the ones that facilitated all the credits from the different vendors. And they also do things like, put on KubeCon, the Kubernetes contributor summits and maintainer summits. And you have a lot of opportunities to people that way. And that also is like where much more of the end users engage, where I would personally love to see like a lot more end users get involved in contributing directly, especially as like, you can de-risk your own usage of the project by actually getting involved and can, help shape the project to be what you need to be by providing feedback and actively engaging. Sorry, this is a little bit of a tangent, but like the project, and not just Kubernetes, like all the CNCF projects are desperate for like actual meaningful feedback. And so you as an end user can actually be like more engaged, if you are more engaged and there, your feedback will be listened to. Because like in the various like surveys and things like that go out, they don't get a lot of responses, and you kind of need to block out and ignore some of the very loud people. Are like, hey, why doesn't this run on a 10-year-old 32-bit Raspberry Pi?
Okay. And last but not least, what's something that what's something about the Kubernetes ecosystem that most people don't realize?
I think there is many components to Kubernetes. And, when people think of Kubernetes, they think of like Kubernetes core. But if you look at Kubernetes itself, there's like 400 GitHub repos. And so there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of interconnected things. So like this can go back to like some of the invisible work, like docs, testing, and like, contributor experience in trying to streamline the project itself and make it easier to contribute to. But there is just a lot that goes into, running a project of that size. These days, Kubernetes has around, I think, around like 1,800 org members, and they've had something like 90,000 contributors. So when it comes to, thinking of stuff like that size, it is a like trying to run your own business or organization. And, that can become, wieldy and difficult to do yourself.
Perfect, Bob. That's all we need for today. Good.